All right, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about something that's pretty much every homeowner's worst nightmare: water damage. It's this silent threat that can go from being a tiny little problem to a massive disaster way faster than you'd think. In this explainer, we're going to walk through everything you need to know, from spotting the first signs all the way to a full recovery. You know how it starts with a simple, almost innocent question. You see a little damp spot, maybe ignore a tiny drip, and you think, it's probably nothing. But that little drip, that's actually the start of a countdown. And the real question is, what is it counting down to? And boom, there's your answer. 24 to 48 hours. That right there, that's your critical window. In just a day or two, that moisture creates the absolute perfect breeding ground for mold to start colonizing. Inside your walls, under your floors, everywhere. The second that water appears, a clock starts ticking. So the takeaway here is simple, but it is so crucial. You have to act fast. Putting it off for even a day or two can turn what could have been a manageable fix into a super complex, really expensive, and honestly, an unhealthy situation for you and your family. Okay, let's get into our first section and really see how this happens. Because, while every house is different, the risks of water damage are surprisingly universal. They're often tied directly to where you live and just how old your home is. And this is where it gets kind of fascinating, right? The environment itself becomes a threat to your home. Just think about it. If you live where it gets cold, those freeze-thaw cycles put a ton of stress on your pipes until they crack. If you have an older home, you might have old cast iron pipes just waiting to corrode and fail. And then you add in things like heavy rain or soil that traps water against your foundation. It's just a perfect recipe for disaster. All right, so if that's the enemy, how do you catch this silent destroyer before it does real damage? Well, you have to become a bit of a detective in your own home. You've got to look for these little, subtle clues. Let's run through the big ones. First up, and this is a big one, trust your nose. Seriously, that specific kind of musty or earthy smell, that is often the very first sign of hidden moisture and mold growth. And you'll usually smell it long before you ever see anything. Next, use your eyes. Look at your walls. When moisture gets trapped behind the drywall, it literally pushes the paint or wallpaper away from the surface. So if you see bubbling, peeling, or blistering, that's a major red flag. And it's not just the walls. Check out your baseboards and door trim. A lot of those materials, especially wood and composites, they act just like a sponge. The second they start soaking up moisture, they swell and warp. It's a really obvious visual clue once you know what to look for. And then, of course, you've got the most obvious sign, the water stain. But here's the catch. By the time you actually see that yellow or brown stain on your ceiling or wall, it means the stuff behind it, the insulation, the wood framing, is already completely saturated with water. So, this is how we get from a small hidden problem to a full-blown, middle-of-the-night disaster. It doesn't always happen gradually. A lot of the time, it happens suddenly, and it's pretty dramatic. I mean, these are the classic emergencies, right? The calls that restoration companies get at 2 a.m., a pipe finally bursts, the sump pump fails during a huge storm, an old water heater just lets go. Any one of these things can dump hundreds of gallons of water into your house in a matter of minutes. Now, when one of those emergencies happens, maybe the single most important factor is what kind of water you're dealing with. And believe it or not all water is the same. The professionals have a standardized system for this, and you really need to understand it for your own safety. It's pretty straightforward, really. You've got 3 categories. Category 1 is clean water, like from a broken water supply line. Category 2 is gray water. It's a little contaminated. Think water from a washing machine overflow. But Category 3, that's the one you have to worry about. That's black water. It's seriously contaminated stuff from sewage or river flooding, and anything porous it touches, carpet, drywall, insulation, it has to be thrown out. Period. So, when the worst happens and you make that call, what actually goes down? Well, there's a very methodical, scientific process that good professionals use to bring order back from all that chaos. Let's take a look at the playbook. See, it's not just some random cleanup effort. It's a very clear 5-step process. It all starts with your emergency call, and then they come out and do a really thorough assessment. After that, it's the heavy lifting, pulling out all the standing water, then setting up equipment to scientifically dry the entire structure, and then finally, rebuilding whatever was damaged. It's a science, not just a cleanup job. And that really gets to the core philosophy of professional restoration. It's all summed up perfectly by this idea. They don't just touch a wall and say, yep, feels dry. No way. They use these specialized meters and sensors to measure the moisture in absolutely everything, ensuring the job is actually truly done. And this is the actual science behind it. It's called psychrometrics. It's all about manipulating the temperature and humidity in the air to create the perfect drying conditions. By controlling the air, they can literally pull trapped moisture right out of the building materials. It's kind of like using giant industrial-strength sponges for the air, and it's all guided by hard data. Okay, so the water's gone, the fans are finally off. What now? This is where we get into the aftermath, addressing all those practical questions about what this is going to cost and what it really takes to recover. First things first, you have to know the difference between two key terms: remediation and restoration. Think of remediation as the emergency room. It's all about stopping the bleeding, extracting the water, and drying things out. Restoration, on the other hand, is the rebuilding phase. That's the surgery and physical therapy that actually puts your home back together. You always need remediation first. So, the big question, what does all this cost? Well, for a typical water damage situation in a home, you're usually looking at a range somewhere between $1,500 and $5,000. Of course, that all depends on how bad the damage is and, you guessed it, which category of water was involved. And naturally, seeing a number like that brings up a pretty important question. Is it really worth it to call in the pros? And the answer is a huge, resounding yes. Because the cost of doing nothing or trying to DIY it is almost always way higher. If you don't handle it right, that leftover moisture leads to structural rot, major foundation issues, and huge mold problems that can cost 10 times more to fix down the road. Now for some good news. A lot of the time, your insurance will help. Your standard homeowner's policy will typically cover damage that's sudden and accidental, like that burst pipe we talked about. What it usually won't cover is gradual damage, like from a slow leak you knew about but ignored. And it won't cover flooding from outside, like a river overflowing. That's a totally separate flood policy. And that kind of leaves us with one last really important question to think about. After all the work is done and the paint is dry, the goal isn't just to have a dry house. The real goal is to have a home that's safe, that's secure, and that's fully put back together. It's about being able to ask yourself, is my home truly whole again?